Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you. I got to ask you a quick question before we get started. Am I too red with the red background, the red shirt today? Am I too red? Should we go a different color with this? Last week we had to do that. Does the blue look better? Blue, not really a Georgia color. I'll let the folks behind the scenes decide what they think looks overall best with that, one way or another. The white's not so bad. That's our typical color pre-summer anyway. The point is, you don't care about the color of the wall. You want to talk some football. There's no light at all. That's not too bad either. You want to talk some football, so we'll get a chance to do that on the program today. It's going to be fun. Chip Towers is here. We need some good news today in football because we did not get any in baseball over the weekend. We shall talk about all of that, and we're going to have some fun at the expense of those lousy, stinking Gators because, boy, Kirby Smart, he is going he's just absolutely just delivering it to Florida with both hands right now, and I love to see it. So we'll do all of that coming up. DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, coming up in just a couple of minutes, y'all know I had a great time with Warren Brinson over the weekend, the four-star defensive tackle, and his recommitment to Georgia, which is really, really fun for a lot of symbolic reasons, which many of you are already aware of. We'll do that coming up. Also, this is a day in which, let's be honest, we need some really good football news because I was at Foley Field over the weekend, saw every game for the Diamond Dogs in the Athens Regional, and the baseball team, unfortunately, was not able to provide any good news for DawgNation, so we'll do that later on. Let me, off the top here, page one above the fold, let me do a little good football stuff before we get to the bad baseball stuff much later on in the program today. And before I get to Warren Brinson, let me talk about something else that I saw this weekend. I love all of these Georgia assistant coaches hosting all the players at their house. I guess they got summer workouts getting ready to really kick into gear here this week, and so it's like one last kind of summer cookout type of thing, one last time to kind of have a good time with everybody before you get really serious and before a lot of these guys start throwing up in trash cans starting about 10:30 this morning. I would imagine many of them are probably finding out what the experience of summer conditioning is like around the Georgia program. One of those guys was Georgia wide receivers coach Cortez Hankton, and in particular, something about the picture from Hankton on Twitter caught my attention. There's been some stuff on DawgNation.com about this already the weekend. If you see the guys kind of gather around there on the right side of your screen, looks like you see the five-star wide receiver George Pickens. Now, one of the things that Trey Blunt said on Twitter is don't look too closely at a lot of these pictures because not every single person's in every single one of these pictures because when you're having your own social gatherings, it kind of works out the same way there as well. But you can see Pickens there in that picture. He's there with the rest of those Georgia wide receivers, and that would lend some credence to something that Jeff Sintel talked about at DawgNation.com not too long ago, that Pickens was expected to show up and be on campus and be ready to go. And there's obviously been the conjecture, am I using that word correctly? The scuttlebutt, to use a different kind of word, about what might or might not be going on with George Pickens and his academics. That's obviously been a hot topic on message boards and things like that. My point in bringing all of this up, though, is not to go down that road because, frankly, I don't think any of us will ever truly know how true all of that was. My point for bringing this up is we talk so much about so many different incoming freshmen to this Georgia team. Most of those were the guys that went through during spring practice. It's almost like Pickens, despite the fact that he's a five-star, despite the fact that he fills a position of need, despite the fact that he was a big-time flip late in the recruiting cycle from Auburn, it's almost like at this point in time, we've forgotten how good George Pickens can be because on shows like this, we just end up talking about Nolan Smith so much or Dominic Blaylock so much or fill in the gap with anybody you want to mention. Nakobe Dean's obviously been a real hot topic. We've talked about so many freshmen over the last few weeks, last couple of months. It's almost like we need a reminder of, hey, don't forget this Pickens young man's pretty good too. This guy out of Hoover, Alabama, that's a pretty big-time get for Georgia, and he may have a say in how all this plays out this season. In fact, if you want to go back to Kirby Smart back during spring practice, when he talked about the evaluation he was making of his wide receivers at the time, no disrespect to them, but you certainly got a sense from Kirby that he was looking forward to getting the full complement of that roster on campus here this summer. And among those names, obviously Pickens. Here's what Kirby said about that then.
Well, ironically, Tyler Simmons has played well. He's really competitive. He's fast. He gets on top of us. He's done some good things. I think D-Rob stepped up. D-Rob's got to continue to play more physical, but he's made some catches. He's made some vertical threats. JJ's playing well. Kieris is coming along, probably not as fast as I'd like. Matt has done some things, and Tommy's done some things. I think, Matt's got some bumps and bruises. Tommy's dealing with some growing injury. The volume we have for the number of receivers we have has been tough, and you usually balance that with tight ends. Well, we don't have volume there. So we're thin, but we know help's on the way. We just got to do a good job developing enough depth that we feel comfortable with. They've made some plays. I definitely think that where last year it was like big play bonanza out there with the wideouts. We had the young DBs. That's balanced out more. So our DBs have gotten better. At least I hope they have. Or the receivers are not as good a group right now as it was this time last year. And that's only going to happen through getting the kids here we signed and continuing to develop them.
So complete honesty, that's not the clip I thought it was going to be. But nonetheless, I just put the wrong clip in the system. But nonetheless, you did hear Kirby Smart say there, help is on the way. And that's the point that I was trying to get to. With the guys that were going through spring and all the names that Kirby Smart mentioned and kind of rattled off all of that, he said, yeah, but we're still looking for more depth, and that help is on the way, both at the wide receiver position and the tight end position. And at times during the spring, Kirby Smart talked a lot about Dominic Blaylock being a part of that help. We've written plenty of stories here at DawgNation.com about the graduate transfer from Miami, Lawrence Cager, being a part of that help. But I think it's important on a day like this, when you saw the picture of Pickens with Hankton and the rest of the wide receivers from over the weekend, don't discount the role that Pickens could play and being a part of that help there as well. Why? Because this young man possesses prodigious talent, as explained by former Georgia wide receiver and wide receiver expert personal coach Terrence Edwards. Here's what he said on a recent edition of DawgNation Daily.
I see a number one wide receiver. I see a guy that can put a team on his back when we need to play. If it's a screen, intermediate plat, taking an option route, or a deep pass, when we need to play in a crucial down, I see a guy that be able to be physical enough to take the abuse from SEC defense along and making plays at the same time. That don't come along very often. So I think he's a guy that could be the next guy that could be a 1,000-yard receiver. He has the tools to do that. I don't know if he would, but I don't know if we're going to throw that much. But he has the tools to be the next receiver to come out of the University of Georgia.
Now, most of you are completely aware of the context with which that statement is made, but it's important to state it myself one more time. There's only been one 1,000-yard receiver in the history of Georgia football, and the man talking was the guy that did that, Terrence Edwards. Edwards says, when I look around at the receivers, the next guy to do that could very well be George Pickens. And of all the candidates on this Georgia roster to do it, he's the one that's the number one wide receiver. He's the one that's the big-time option, the kind of guy that stretches fields on third and long. That's the guy to do it. If there's a 1,000-yard receiver on this roster, Terrence Edwards says it's going to be George Pickens to do that, and he bases that on the film that he's watched from Pickens, which I think is a really exciting thing to think about when a guy like Edwards vouches for him the way that he did. And another reason why it's kind of exciting to have Pickens on campus right now. A couple more things here, too, about this Pickens situation that I like. Let me go back to signing day for Pickens himself. When he flipped from Auburn, when he left his own high school there at Hoover to go to another location so he could sign his letter of intent with Georgia, he talked to some local TV there in Alabama about that decision, why it ended up being Georgia over Auburn. He talks about a few things here, but there's one word in particular that I think Georgia fans ought to be listening to carefully and closely when they hear from George Pickens. This is the reason why he was brought to Georgia, and apparently from Pickens' standpoint, this is the reason why he wanted to be here. Let's go back to February with Pickens.
It came down to the wire, actually. They both had good coaches, great everything. They both were actually the same in my mind. It just what separated them was the winning factor. And then they both had great quarterbacks, and then the pass that Kirby has with Nick Saban, so that kind of brought a lot out to me.
So he talks about a lot of things there, but it's that phrase in the middle of that I think is going to get Georgia fans excited, but the mindset that Pickens brings with him to Georgia. The idea of the winning factor. He simply states that Georgia's just winning right now more than Auburn is. Why wouldn't I want to be a part of this program? And yet there's an additional, I guess, layer to that discussion in the fact that Georgia has won plenty, but there's one thing it still hasn't won, and that's the national championship. And as we say over and over, when you look at the teams that have won the national championship, dynamic receivers are a big part of the recipe for how they've gotten that done. Justin Ross at Clemson last year, guys like Jerry Jeudy at Alabama the year before. I think that George Pickens can be that guy for Georgia. No guarantee that he will. Not every five-star pans out to the full level of his potential, but the potential for Pickens is certainly pretty mighty. And, by the way, there's one more thing that makes today a pretty good day when it comes to George Pickens being on campus, being ready to rock and roll. You get the sense that Gus Malzahn does not like it at all, and making Malzahn mad for Georgia fans is never a bad thing. Just out of spite and just because I want to, here's Malzahn, by the way, talking about missing out on George Pickens.
Usually I don't comment on guys that go other places, but he was committed to us for 2 years and decided to go somewhere else. But, the good thing is that we have some very young, talented receivers, so we'll be fine in that position.
How tough was that? Because back in December, you said you wanted to add a big-time receiver by signing day, and then last minute.
Yeah, and like I said, I think the good thing for us is we've got a lot of big-time receivers that are young, so that's not going to bother us.
I mean, honestly, I wish I was a better person than this. I wish I didn't take such pleasure from seeing Malzahn be so unhappy, but that's what recruiting about. That's what recruiting's all about. It's essentially a zero-sum game. Auburn loses a player, Georgia gains one. My expectation is they have pretty big plans for him on the field this fall. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. No matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and it's a podcast wherever you find them, the Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're really glad you're with us. And let me tell you one thing here really quickly. Tomorrow on our program, I'm going to make another big announcement about how DawgNation Days of Summer just keeps getting even bigger and even better. Now, by the way, let me also give you one more thing here as well. On your screen, if you're watching on video, you see some of the cool things about Callaway Resort and Gardens. I cannot wait to be there on Thursday, June 13th. One thing, though, that has been kind of quietly happening while all of the talk about Callaway, because Callaway's now just a little bit more than a week away. Y'all, if you're planning on being with us on Thursday, August 1st at Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa, you got to go and get booked up and ready to go. We're selling rooms there left and right. I saw some new information about that over the weekend, so don't forget about that because those rooms are starting to fill up on a Thursday, August 1st at Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. Obviously, we're getting excited about Callaway Resort and Gardens, but the Brasstown stuff is filling up and moving fast. So if you're making plans to be there with us for that, don't hesitate, don't wait, because those things are getting booked and getting booked fast. Callaway Resort and Gardens is the same way. We've had a huge run on rooms the last couple of days. A lot of folks in that West Georgia area. I'm talking about Carrollton, Columbus, that entire part of the state. A lot of you planning on driving over there that night. We're starting to get plans built up and set up and ready to go. It's just going to be an incredible time. Many of you are planning on playing golf with us there on that Friday, June 14th. A lot of you are extending your stay into the Father's Day weekend, which I think is just a really cool thing. What an incredible time it's going to be starting Thursday, June 13th, as DawgNation Days of Summer kicks off. And tomorrow on the program, I am going to make an announcement about why that particular day at Callaway Resort and Gardens is going to be even bigger. Obviously, there has been some talk about being able to get in for a VIP reception for those of you who are not staying. I don't know that we have any of those spots left. I don't know. I may have to get that confirmed one way or another if we still have any spots left for the VIP reception for the folks who are not staying at the resort. So I don't 100% know about that. Let me get some clarity on that before I say one way or another, because a lot of folks have already taken us up on our offer to basically get a ticket to get into the VIP reception there that night at 5 p.m. So we'll do some more details on that as we kind of get closer to the week. And tomorrow, big announcement about how DawgNation Days of Summer going to be even bigger and even better. All right, let me talk recruiting here some more for a moment, because there is something going on between Georgia and Florida right now. Now, obviously, this is maybe wishful thinking on my part. Maybe I'm writing a little bit of fiction into what is otherwise just kind of a stark reality. However, I feel like I may have a little bit of a point on this one. There has been a lot of chatter this offseason with the things kind of coming out of Florida. In fairness, not all of it's come from Dan Mullen. Some of this has come from, goofball columnists. Some of this has come from just rank-and-file Florida fan. It's not all been from Dan Mullen, but Dan Mullen, by kind of fanning the flames of asking people to read into his spring game attendance total, has kind of started a narrative that has made it seem like Florida has been talking a bunch of trash at Georgia this offseason. And recently, when Georgia coach Kirby Smart was on the Paul Feinbaum show. He said, we don't talk trash during the offseason. We do our talking a very specific kind of way. Here is what Kirby told Feinbaum.
I just don't think you need that. I don't think that's what's going to make Georgia great. We're not going to move up in the rankings because of what I say or what I do. We're going to do it by how we play, and we want to talk with our helmets. That's what we've always talked about. We want to play physical brand of football and not really do it with our mouthpiece.
Lord in heaven, y'all. Kirby Smart has been talking with his helmet in recruiting now for about, the last several weeks. It continued again on Saturday where you had a former Georgia commit, Warren Brinson, then decommitted from the program, names Georgia and Florida as his top two, only to pull the rug out from underneath Florida again and recommit to Georgia. I don't know if we have him on social media doing that. Yeah, really good-looking edit on Twitter from Warren Brinson announcing his recommitment to Georgia. I mean, this looks like nothing else other than that, that handshake game where you say, hey, buddy, how you doing? And you pull your hand back at the last minute. That's essentially what Kirby Smart's doing to Dan Mullen, the recruiting trail right now, using Warren Brinson apparently as a willing accomplice to get that done. And it's not the first time this offseason where Kirby has taken Dan Mullen's face and kind of rubbing it in the dirt when it comes to the recruiting stuff here. Go back to Carson Beck, the Georgia quarterback commit, who explained at one point in time that he essentially almost used Florida to get the offer from Georgia. How bad does that make the Gators look coming from Jacksonville? In fact, here's what Beck said about that in his own words.
I had obviously named Florida as my leader, and I kind of just put that out there to say, hey, this is the team that's coming at me the hardest. This is the team where I feel like I could see myself at. But also I had two schools kind of in the back of my head, one of those being Georgia, where if I got that offer, I would pause for a second and say, okay, hold on, I got to kind of take this in. So I visited up there, and it was absolutely awesome and everything that I expected.
I mean, this is brutal. I mean, for someone like me who considers himself the chief Gator hater, who's got Eddie on the set with him every single day here on DawgNation Daily, right here in our studio, even I'm starting to be like, Kirby, are you really going to do him that way in recruiting this entire summer? Carson Beck saying I used Florida to get a Georgia offer. Warren Brinson saying, hey, Georgia and Florida's my top two, only to pick Georgia again. I mean, you had Dan Mullen do the whole thing last week where he was like, the trash talk stuff has been overblown. Mullen better try to get that message out there as much as he can, because as it stands right now, Kirby is going scorched earth in recruiting against Florida. And you know what? I'm pretty entertained by it. It's a DawgNation Daily. By the way, for those of you getting ready to make some great, great summer travel plans, and let's face it, that costs money, gas in the tank, fuel is expensive. Well, Kroger's got a way for you to save. You can get 3 times the fuel points right now on hundreds of items throughout the store, including Kroger ice cream, bag and treats for your dogs, Hershey's chocolate syrup, Red Bull, and a whole bunch more. Just look for those tags there on the aisle, and you can then save the 3 times the fuel points. If you're making a trip there this summer, a little extra money to put gas in the tank is never a bad thing. Kroger's got you taken care of. All right, now let's get ready to shift gears. We'll talk in a moment about the bad weekend for Georgia baseball and kind of everything else, including the odd new alcohol policy that seems to be in place at the University of Georgia. Let's do all that with Chip Towers right now. Great to have you with us.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So I sat by this man pretty much the entire weekend, and from a Georgia baseball fan's perspective, it was not a good weekend for the Diamond Dogs. We shall get to that in just a moment. We'll do some football before we get there. Chip Towers, good to have you back here on DawgNation Daily. We appreciate your time and in and around a marathon weekend of baseball. Hope you found some time to have some fun.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me in to talk the bad news.
Yeah, we'll get to that coming up in just a moment. Let me do something else before we get there. We talked about Warren Brinson a little bit before you joined us. I know you wrote about this at DawgNation.com a bit over the weekend. And for me, the context here is this sort of interesting rivalry that seems to be kind of budding between Georgia and Florida. And a lot of this is people like me in the media fanning the flames of this. I'll certainly admit that. And yet, certainly the context for this is hard to ignore. Brinson was a UGA commit, decommitted, names Georgia and Florida as his top two, and then announces Georgia as his recommitment here. Whether he did this intentionally or not, Georgia fans are certainly going to have fun with this, are they not?
Oh, it's often forgotten about that you have 3 actual phases of recruiting there. You have commitment, decommitment, and recommitment. And the recommitment is particularly painful for the guy on the other side of that. And I know you revel in that, Brandon, but that is, that's obviously a big win for Georgia. And, and I know, I mean, that's absolutely the biggest area of need for the Georgia Bulldogs at this point in time. I mean, no matter how hard you recruit, no matter how hard you address your needs, there's always going to be, one area on the field or another that's just doesn't have the depth that you'd like to be. You'd like to have at that particular time, and Georgia has that in a few areas right now, but I don't think any area is more stark when it comes to comparing yourself to the best of the best in the nation, and that's in the really on the interior defensive line. I think Georgia's fine on the edges. I think Georgia's fine in the back third. I think Georgia's actually pretty good in the linebacker position. It's just really in the big uglies down front that you've got to not only get better immediately, but you've got to build some depth there. That's what they're missing, is quality depth, like you see on the offensive line and in the backfield and other places. And to a lesser extent, you got that everywhere else. I think Brinson certainly addresses that. And when you had a guy that it's pitting you between your Eastern Division conference rival, you really need to get those battles done. And Kirby, another tally on his side of that worksheet.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think that your point about the defensive line on the field is a pretty big issue for Georgia because, Chip, as much that was discussed during spring practice about the havoc rate and getting more sacks, more tackles for loss, and I understand why all of that was a topic because that is an area in which Georgia needs to improve. The issue last year with Georgia in key spots, being able to stop the run, that's almost as big a deal. Statistically, it wasn't as bad, but it certainly was not among the national elite in terms of rush defense, being able to stop the other side's running backs. This is something that Georgia was not great at a year ago. So this is one of those areas in which, not just in future years in recruiting, but even on the field for Georgia in 2019, there is some questions about that defensive line depth, which is another reason why the addition of a guy like Brinson, or I guess the re-addition of a guy like Brinson, is going to turn some heads, because I don't think there's any doubt this is an area in which Georgia has kind of been sort of deficient.
Well, you hear Kirby talk about it all the time. He talks about dominating the man in front of you, and at no other position, other than maybe offensive line, is that the case? Is that case important in football? And it's because of everything it allows you to do. If you have the type of players up front that can dominate the guy in front of them, require double teams just to handle him, and more, then that has a trickle-down effect on your defensive strategy, whatever it is you're trying to do. There are ways to dial up pressure, but the more that you're having to do it without up-front domination, the more risk you're taking. And, I think Georgia will take more risk generally this year under Dan Lanning. But the real, the real solving formula to that equation is just having defensive line that whip butt, up front. And I think Georgia has some potential guys who can do that. I think they have some guys that need to do a better job of it. I thought last year Tyler Clark would move into that role, and he never really did. I think Jordan Davis has that capability. He's certainly bigger than anybody around, but quickness is a big factor up front. And, I think you see kind of that in a lot of this recruiting that Kirby and his staff are doing up front. Guys like Jalen Carter and Warren Brinson that, are a little bit slimmer, a little bit smaller, maybe not quite as tall, but very, very athletic. And Georgia needs to get better in that, in that particular area quick if they're going to contend for what everybody wants them to. And that's not just, winning seasons and winning the Eastern Division, but it's winning the SEC and national championship.
Before we get to the baseball stuff, let me talk to you about the alcohol policy just for a moment. Of course, the SEC kind of lifts its ban on alcohol being sold in the common areas of sporting venues. But before that, Georgia had already decided it was going to do something it had not done before, which is make some of this stuff a little more available in some of the premium seating areas. Now, my understanding is this would not have been banned in the previous, I guess, iteration of this policy prior to it being kind of lifted at the end of SEC spring meetings, but it's a new step forward for Georgia. And the thing that's gotten the most attention is the threshold required to be able to buy one of these beers or glasses of wine at a Georgia football game this fall. You've got to be a McGill Society donor, but of, I guess, at least $100,000 of lifetime giving to even be considered, $250,000 to be guaranteed. I believe I've got those numbers right. This obviously kind of raises some eyebrows because of the dollar amounts are kind of thrown around here. I kind of take this as a little bit of bad PR for Georgia, although I don't know that it's that big of a deal one way or another. I guess my description of this, Chip, is this is just a really weird rollout. Do you agree that this whole thing and how Georgia's handled it has kind of been weird, whether you're pro-alcohol in stadiums or anti-alcohol in stadiums? The way that Georgia has done this and the specifics of this instance, they just kind of seem weird to me. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I think it's backfired a little bit, the whole thing, for sure. And some of that might have to do. I mean, Georgia, let's be honest about this. Wanted to roll this out after the SEC did what it did down in Destin, which was to introduce approve alcohol distribution in SEC stadiums for this season, and then Georgia wanted to come out and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. But I happen to be a little bit ahead of the story on that, and found out that all these machinations were already well underway, and this is what they were going to do, and then I appealed to the people who it affects, which is really two sets of people. There's McGill Society members and major donors who get to benefit from this, and then there's all the Georgia fans who don't get to benefit from it in any way, and both of them aren't really well served in this case.
No pun intended.
I think. Go ahead.
I said no pun intended. You said they're not well served. I said no pun intended.
Yeah. Now, so the thing, so that's the thing about it. I mean, so I talked to some McGill members, some of them, very, very, very major donors, okay? And they're not going. Why? Well, because they don't have to. I mean, a lot of these guys are in the suites. They served alcohol for a long time in the suites. I'm talking about the Sky Suites because those are private leases. A lot of the other ones are like, I just don't want to go to the trouble of doing that. I have my own tailgate, and then, not everybody has to drink when they go in there. Then the people that are leasers are all those fans that, on the 100 and 300 levels that are give their donations every year to get their tickets, but not more. And look, let me, forgetting the criticism, here's the reality. This is just moving closer and closer and closer to the line until the line is blurred, and then the line is gone. And that's where it's heading. They'll be selling out. It's going to start in other SEC schools this year, where you can go up into the main concourse and order you a draft beer, for $7 or $8 probably from a tap, and then take it back to your seat, and then they'll probably quit selling it, after halftime or some kind of policy like that. And once that starts at one place, everybody will do it eventually. But this is what Georgia's doing now. They assure me this is not about raising more money or anything like that. It's about providing a service that has been requested on whatever level. And I'm sure, it's supposed to be able to serve about 400 people. It's on the 200 level. There's not you walk through there, Brendan, when you come to the games and when we go down to press conferences after the press conference. But otherwise, it's a restricted area level on that 200. So most people aren't really going to see it. They're not going to know what's going on. And it'll be interesting to see what the end of the day, what the reaction to it's going to be among the Georgia people.
So the story behind this story is what's fascinating to me, because I've been going to Georgia games my whole life, and Chip, I don't think there's ever been a single Saturday in which I didn't have to step over someone who was passed out drunk at some point in time on that particular Saturday. So, I mean, there's already a lot of alcohol consumption going on, whether it's provided and sold by Georgia or not, which makes the whole hand-wringing on this. This is not from just Georgia. This is the SEC included. There's a lot of schools kind of taking a similar approach to Georgia on this. Eventually, they're all going to do it because whether they say it's about money or not, they'll make more money from doing it. So eventually they will do it. But why are they being so weird about it, given the fact that more than half the people in the stadium as it is are, so drunk they can't stand up? I mean, Why are they being so weird about all of this?
Well, welcome to the hypocrisy of higher education, right? I mean, it's one of those deals that they, they want to say that, don't drink and drive and don't do all these kind of things on one side, and on the other side, then they want to, serve their donors and raise money and all that kind of stuff. And so, I think they're pretty torn about it. And I think if Georgia had their way, maybe there wouldn't be any alcohol served beyond, just the regular auspices, which that is sitting in your tailgate and bring your own and drink it and, sneak it in if you want to. I mean, if you're honest about it, how many people are sneaking alcohol in? Will this, fix the problem of binge drinking? One of the problems that they say is, if somebody, is getting ready to go into games, he's going to slam back, that last, third of his Jack Daniels and then go into the stadium because he's not going to be able to drink for the next 3 or 4 hours. It's just a hypocrisy of higher education. But again, at the end of the day, the SEC and college athletics all together, it's all about competition. And if the other guys are doing it, you're going to do it because your guys are going to want to do it. They're going to want to do it the way, hey, they do it like this over here at LSU. Why aren't we doing that? Well, you will eventually. And I think it is a significant revenue stream at some point, when you have the Budweiser taps on the 100 concourses, it'll probably be a pretty good revenue stream.
So let me finish with this. As we said, we talked about we saw the Diamond Dogs together, every game, I guess, for the weekend. And Chip, as you know, it was not a good weekend. Florida State just was not that good of a team all year long, and they just blitzed Georgia in 2 separate games to eliminate the Diamond Dogs after being a number 4 national seed, the host team there. If you're a Georgia baseball fan, Chip, how are you supposed to process this?
Well, I actually think the Georgia baseball fans, the true Georgia baseball fans, the ones that are there all year long, get season tickets, tailgate, the guys in the left field lounge, they don't have a problem processing it, because you get baseball. I mean, baseball is just, this is such a funny game, and you hear it all the time at the major league level. Anything can happen in a 3-game series. Anything can happen in a short series because, baseball, it doesn't always, the best team necessarily doesn't always win. Now, Florida State, I'm not saying Florida State wasn't the best team, but, Georgia ran into a buzzsaw. I mean, that was just a hot team. You saw it. It didn't matter who you could put on the mound. They were going to pound the ball. I think they're supremely motivated for their skipper, Mike Martin's 40 straight years. Incredible just to even wrap your head around to think that he was coaching Florida State at the same time Vince Dooley was coaching Georgia in football. Just really an amazing thing. And the other thing that's just hard to get your head around is that, that's 39 wins now. They only came in with 36, one more in that 40 consecutive seasons that Mike Martin's team has won at least 40 games. So you're not messing around with just a baseball also ran when Florida State comes to your regional period. You saw all the fans that they have. They have a huge fan base, and they know what they're doing. You ran into a buzzsaw. That said, there's no excuses. I mean, Georgia was the 4th seed for a reason. They won the number of games that they won for a reason. It set up pretty well for them, I thought, when you got Tony Losey, Emerson Hancock, Tim Elliott, and Cole Wilcox all taking the mound. If you knew that, heading into it, you'd be happy with that scenario. And but I think at the end of the day, it was just a hot team, and I don't think it's anything to get necessarily disgusted with, other than if it happens, if it keeps happening, then obviously you're going to have to make a change, and that'll happen with Scott Strickland. But I didn't see anything. I mean, maybe you did, Brandon, but I didn't see anything from a managerial standpoint that told me that this was a mismanaged team or was insufficiently motivated or whatever. I mean, baseball, it's pitching and catching and hitting, and Georgia didn't hit. Didn't hit as well as it needed to, and its pitching got too well by Florida State, not by anybody else, but Florida State chewed them up, spit them out, and that happens sometimes.
Yeah, Chip, I think it's a fascinating story, and for the folks who kind of became invested in this team this season, obviously a disappointing conclusion, but no doubt there'll be hopefully brighter days ahead for that team. We appreciate your time here on DawgNation Daily. We'll look forward to reading a bunch from you this week at DawgNation.com and chatting with you again soon.
See ya.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I'll talk more about the baseball thing coming up in a moment. As far as like managerial decisions go for them, I mean, I guess the only thing that you might talk about a little bit is bringing the infield in very early, especially on Saturday, fourth inning there. But listen, I mean, you're gonna be able to nitpick about stuff like that, and that's the story as old as baseball. I mean, I think the biggest issue for the Diamond Dogs ends up being, Chip says just not hitting, but we kind of expected Georgia to not be an offensive juggernaut going in to the NCAA tournament. I think the issue for me, what was eye-opening for me, was great defense, which had been the characteristic and the hallmark of Georgia all season long. That totally disappears. Frankly, the Georgia pitchers, a lot of them didn't really throw strikes as frequently as you might would have expected based on what happened in the regular season. Those are the two big things that were different. So, that's where my questions would go, is not what happened to the offense, because that's pretty much what we thought might go on, but why wasn't the defense more assured, especially looking at yesterday's game? And boy, a lot of really good pitchers had a really hard time finding the strike zone this weekend. So tough weekend for the Diamond Dogs all the way around. Let me also say one more thing about this kind of Georgia's role in the alcohol policy, then I want to talk about it league-wide here for a moment. I'll do all of that. I'll also remind you about my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. There's a few issues for homeowners that kind of give you a little bit of a pit in your stomach. I'm talking about, you see a crack show up in your foundation. A lot of times you notice on the outside of your house, or you see a wet spot down in your basement, sort of a damp area somewhere down there, let you know that water may be creeping in somewhere. Those are things that make you nervous. You want experts to take good care of you. Engineered Solutions of Georgia, they define expertise because they have a full-time engineer on staff. So trust them. They're smart people. They do expert work. You can give them a call at 678-ESOG now. 678-ESOG now. So talked with Chip Towers a moment ago about this new alcohol policy thing, where apparently they're going to sell some of this on a limited basis in the 200 level to McGill Society donors who have kind of crossed the $100,000 threshold, although to be guaranteed a chance, I guess you have to have, $250,000 of lifetime donations to be guaranteed. And my point on this, and look, this is all complicated stuff. How you handle your donors and how you handle all of the perks that donors get, it's all complicated to a certain extent. It's probably all over my head. But the one thing I'd be a little bit afraid of, and the one thing that seems like a little bit of an unforced error on the part of Georgia, is the way this is rolled out and unveiled almost has the whiff of making the $25,000 donors, and I believe that's the benchmark to get into the McGill Society is $25,000. It almost makes them feel like paupers, because you're saying, hey, within this McGill Society, we're not going to differentiate between the guys at the lower end of that McGill Society and the guys at the higher end of that. And that's what you got to be really, really careful about, because I hear from donors all the time who are not to the McGill Society level, and they get mad all the time about the way in which they're made to feel less than in comparison to McGill. And I get the need to push for more donations and to give a certain level of status for achieving a certain donation. That's how you build West End Zone facilities. That's how you're going to build a new weight room and stuff like that eventually. I get all of that. But I think you got to be careful with the feeling that you give to people along the way, and saying, hey, here's some beer and wine for the people who've given like $250,000. Who can even fathom giving that much money? That's, I don't know that I'll ever meet anyone who's given that much money to the Athletic Association. So it's kind of just a weird situation, especially given the fact that not every McGill Society donor has 200 level tickets anyway. The club section is kind of its own line of demarcation, because there are plenty of McGill Society donors who don't have tickets inside of there. So I think it's kind of a complicated deal. Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated tweeted the other day, as far as the new policy goes, where it's going to be now SEC teams kind of free to make their own choices about this. Dellinger at Sports Illustrated said on Friday that LSU, Missouri, Ole Miss, Kentucky, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, and Florida were considering it. He also gives an LOL for LSU. As a guy who once lived in Baton Rouge, he seems to think LSU is pretty eager to sell some booze. He says the no's, though, are Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, and Mississippi State. And he says it's too early to tell about Arkansas and Texas A&M, although I guess you can now put Texas A&M in the maybe category on this too. for the most part, I'm kind of agnostic on this. I don't really care one way or another. But I'm a little bit surprised the SEC is just being so pearl clutching about this, just given the fact that the average, alcohol consumption level for most of these fans of these games is pretty high as it is. Couple other things I was going to do. Let me push this ESPN story aside. I'll do that later on. Let me quickly mention, though, that the AJC did have really good coverage of the very sad, just incredibly sad story of the Bramblets. Of course, Rod Bramblett, longtime Auburn play-by-play announcer who, as you know, he and his wife were recently killed in a car wreck. They had a memorial service at Auburn at the end of last week, which is a really, really touching thing. And I thought, as much as I like, kind of ragging on Auburn and kind of being the rival, the Georgia-Auburn rivalry, in the less serious world of sports, we have a really good time with this. In the more serious world of real life, we know that those are people with families and hopes and dreams and aspirations, just like Georgia fans are. And it was just a tragic scenario for that Auburn community when the Bramblett story unfolded over the Memorial Day weekend. I thought Auburn did a great job memorializing their lives, and certainly Bramblett famous for some of his calls, including the kick six. It was a terrific memorial service. I thought Auburn just handled it in such a classy way. And I thought that Steve Hummer at AJC.com had a great coverage of that and a great piece on the Bramblets themselves. So if you're an SEC fan, I think you'd do yourself a favor to read what Steve wrote about that at the AJC. I thought they did a really good job covering what is not a great story, certainly, but the kind of thing that, these news accounts end up being part of the memorial. 100 years from now, we'll look back on these lives and we'll understand them through the spectrum of how they were covered in the news. And I thought Steve Hummer at the AJC did a really good job of doing that. We'll make that your SEC through. And now to kind of pivot back to more, I guess, happier content, certainly what we're not used to talking about here on DawgNation Daily, let me get ready to set up our summer Q&A. I want to take as many of your comments as I can here, and if you're listening, you don't have a chance to respond live. I know many of you sometimes say you'd like more of a chance to do that. One of the ways you can reach out to the show is with me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. I'd love to hear from you on the summer Q&A questions or on video. You have a chance to respond to some of this as well. So let me throw the questions up for today, and we'll see if we can rock and roll and take a few of your comments. First of all, do you think that Warren Brinson deliberately trolled Florida with the way that he handled his recruitment, decommitting, announcing Florida as a finalist, then recommitting to Georgia? I sort of suspect there may have been a little bit of fun going on there with Mr. Brinson, which I really, really like. And second question, how big of an impact do you think George Pickens will make? Given the fact that Kirby talked about Blaylock as much as he did during the spring, I can certainly get it if you think that the Blaylock impact's going to be bigger right now. But the point that I try to make off the top of the program is, with all the attention we give to all these Georgia freshmen, let's not forget to give a lot of that attention to George Pickens, too, because I still think he's a big-time player and has a chance to make a very big impact on Georgia. And then finally, did you watch the Diamond Dogs this weekend? Because to me, the biggest loss for Georgia in losing the series to Florida State was the lost opportunity to really earn for itself some new fans. I got the sense on Saturday that there was a lot of extra interest on that game against Florida State. A lot of Georgia fans were really fired up and ready to go. National television audience for that. But then by the time, the Sunday thing rolls around and it seemed like, this was not going to be a great weekend for Georgia, it seems like some of that momentum had already been lost even before the game was over on Sunday night. So I'll give you a chance to weigh in on that too. Let's pop in here and take a few comments and see what's going on here. James Bryant says Pickens himself will determine how big of an impact he makes. So that's James weighing in on Pickens. I think it's also important to add that wide receiver, while we've seen freshmen make pretty significant contributions for a lot of elite national teams over the last couple of years, it can still be a difficult position to play as a freshman. And at Georgia, there's a lot of competition for those key spots. So James says the ball is in Pickens' court to determine what he becomes, but he's also got some circumstances in all of this that are not fully in his control as well, including just how much you see from some of the other guys there in that discussion. So anyway, John Anthony says Pickens on offense and Dean or Smith on defense will be the top impact freshman. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of interesting that we've talked so much about Nakobe and so much about Nolan that a guy like Pickens almost gets lost in the fold there. But John says when it comes to the impact guys, he puts Pickens right there in that same category. At this point in time, my expectation is both Nakobe Dean and Nolan Smith are going to be pretty significant contributors. So if Pickens is as good as I think both those guys look to be right now, Georgia could be in pretty good shape here. Sonia Prescott says, BA, how'd the smoked mullet taste this past weekend? You know, Sonya, I still haven't had any. I need to get some. That's an inside joke for a lot of our regular daily listeners and viewers, going back to when the Dan Mullets thing from Wise Dog first popped up. So that's kind of an inside joke on that. At some point in time, I'm going to have some smoked mullet, maybe like a mullet dip with some crackers, maybe something along those lines. Randy Hall says that he thinks that Pickens can be an impact freak this season as a freshman. Yeah, maybe he could be. Joel Moody says, I hope Brinson did troll Florida. I think a lot of Georgia fans are kind of the same way. If it's not true, we don't want to know differently. I think that's the way probably a lot of Georgia fans feel on this. No doubt it was a really fun weekend. Freshmen are on campus. New guys are committing. There is a lot of energy around this Georgia program right now. It is going to be a fun summer around DawgNation. And, of course, no show would be complete without our Gator Hater Updater. And these days, Gator hating's never been more in style than it is right now. And we are now to 947 days. That is how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. You could say in football, but darn near close to about anything, it seems like, lately with all the recruits and some of the stuff that's been going on there, so that's really fun to see. Let me also take a moment here, not to just beat you over the head with this, but I do want to remind you that we are getting excited and ready to go for DawgNation Days of Summer. We're in the stretch run. This is Thursday, June 13th, so they're less than 2 weeks away. Tomorrow, I'm going to tell you one more thing. There's a specific reason why I'm doing it tomorrow. I'm not just dragging it out to, make some sort of show out of it. There's a specific reason why I'm going to tell you this tomorrow. But it's getting even bigger. We'll tell you about that. If you're in West Georgia, drive over and see us. If you're around the Atlanta area, do like I'm going to do. Escape. Get out there and stay for a couple days and enjoy the sun. Play some golf. Either way, we'll see you tomorrow morning on DawgNation Daily. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down, and it is great to have all of you with us for that. By the way, speaking of R.S. Andrews, there's a great offer from R.S. Andrews I want to make sure that you're really aware of. They call it the $99 Smiley Tune-Up. I've told you before that story after stories, R.S. Andrews delivers smiles, and the Smiley Tune-Up is one of the way they do that. It's complete diagnostic to kind of get your system back up to factory fresh specs. By the way, that's almost like it's like a little bit of a tongue twister, but nonetheless, factory fresh specs RS Andrews can get your system back up to. And it's just $99. It's one more reason why RS Andrews is the one the DawgNation trusts. So find them online at rsandrews.com. And Daria and the gang over there will truly deliver smiles for you, just like they have for so many of the people in the Atlanta area. All right, I did some Facebook comments a moment ago. Let me do some YouTube comments. We'll talk a little bit of baseball in here if you want to. I won't beat you over the head with it because I realize many of you probably would rather just talk about football, which I totally understand. Can I tell a quick story, though, before we get into the meat of our conversation with some YouTube comments? So Mike Martin, the Florida State coach, is a guy that I have heard of a lot over the years, but admittedly, I didn't really know that much about because the honest truth is, while I like college baseball, I don't love college baseball. I'm sort of getting more into it the last couple of years, but, for like the last 10 or 15 years, I just haven't really watched all that much college baseball. It's been on, and I've paid attention to it, but not as deeply as I do some of the other sports. So I've known Martin, didn't really know a ton about him, though. The thing I probably knew about him more than anything else is the fact that Florida State's been kind of one of these teams that's been very close a lot and not gotten over the hump. They've never won a national championship, although they've been to the College World Series like 250 times or something, crazy like that. So last night, now, I wasn't intended to be a part of this conversation, but I also wasn't like intentionally eavesdropping either. I was walking from like the press conference area back to the top of the stadium to get out of the stadium. I was going home, but kind of in that little corridor area underneath the stadium. I'm Scott Strickland's basically walking in front of me, and Mike Martin kind of is walking from his clubhouse back the other way. He's going to go meet with some Tallahassee reporters. And Martin stops Strickland and, just has the most classy exchange in the world. And this is Martin's last year at Florida State. And like I said, I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping on this, but for a brief moment, I was kind of trapped. I couldn't get around them without it just being super awkward. So I had to kind of stand there. And Martin was certainly speaking loud enough for anybody who was in earshot to hear him. He basically just, consoled him and, told him what a great team he had and what a bright future he thought that Georgia had. And Strickland had some classy responses back to Martin, congratulating his team for playing as well as it did. And that was really one of those moments that you don't really see in football very much, right? I mean, we're not really privy to what the two coaches say to each other very much when it comes to the end of a football game. In some cases, some of these coaches probably don't say anything to each other. But Martin is kind of known for being kind of a classy guy, and he really put that on display last night. Not intentionally. He wasn't doing this for the benefit of reporters, but I just happened to be kind of within earshot of that. And so I'm really grateful that I got a chance to see that exchange because, let's face it, Strickland didn't sleep last night. There's not a chance in the world he did. He may not sleep again tonight either. So he was pained, I'm sure, by what he experienced. Martin's been there before, and as a coach much farther down the line in his career, I thought he said some really nice things in a private setting last night that I was, I guess, just randomly lucky enough to be able to hear. Connor Riley joins us.
Interesting, factoid I learned over the course of this week, and I was watching from home. I thought Tom Hart and Kyle Peterson did a great job calling the games. They are wildly entertaining to listen to. And, most of those games were blowouts, but I was still intrigued, and I was learning the whole time. The NCAA baseball tournament has done this sort of regional, super regional format for the last 21 years. Mm-hmm. This is the 17th time that Florida State has advanced to a super regional.
How about that? That's a good stat.
And I think that sort of Georgia. This is only the second. I mean, they were there last year, obviously, but this is really only the second time in recent memory under Strickland period.
Yeah.
Where they've sort of been in this situation, and I do think that experience sort of may have given Florida State an edge.
So listen to Memphis Dog on YouTube. He says, "BA, that was a good story, but not as short as you promised it would be." Thanks, Memphis. I appreciate that. And that's a really good stat. And I do think, for those of you who follow Tom Hart, I think that Tom does a good job with football, baseball, and basketball because, like Tom, who I do know a little bit, and he's been on the show from time to time, he's just a big college sports fan, right? He's a real big fan, and he calls the games like a fan. He was interacting with the greenhouse folks, the old Kudzu Hill area, which has kind of been reformed a little bit around Foley Field. He was interacting with them on Twitter during the game Sunday afternoon. I mean, he's just a fan, not a fan of Georgia, but a fan of college sports. And so when he's doing a Georgia game, it's always going to be pretty fun because of that. And he'll come on this show and he'll give opinions, he'll kind of bust chops and some things like that. He's just a good guy from that standpoint.
I do have to correct you on something. This is twice now you've called it the Kudzu Hill area.
Uh-huh.
It's the greenhouse.
I said greenhouse. I said it's the old Kudzu Hill.
Well, it is, to most people nowadays, it is just the.
If you go back and listen to the tape, what I said is the greenhouse, which is the old Kudzu Hill area. That's what I said. I gave it its proper context.
I'm just trying to keep you hip,
And listen, that's a full-time job. That is a full-time job. All right, let me do some YouTube comments here. Robert Barnes says, I wouldn't get too excited about Brinson. He isn't rated that high, and I haven't been that impressed with the players coming out of IMG. Here's what I'll say about Brinson, though. He is a guy that has risen the rankings a lot, seemingly as of late, or at least there's seemingly more buzz. I don't really know what his ranking changes have been, but he's certainly added a lot of buzz to this here lately. Toledo O'Neill says, let's have a Modelo on June 13th. My friend Toledo, I would love that. We will absolutely share a beverage on June 13th, and I can't wait to see you there at DawgNation Days of Summer. That's going to be really fun. So, I mean, I like Brinson. And what I'll say in terms of the recruiting rankings, a lot of these guys, Brinson's become a pretty beefy defensive lineman at this point in time. I mean, Jordan Davis wasn't a 5-star either because a lot of times those space eaters aren't necessarily going to be that way, and you see how valuable he's become. So I'm going to trust the evaluation on Brinson, and I feel like that's all really you can do on this. Light Dog 1968 says some new rankings are coming out. I don't know if he means for one service in particular. He says he's going to be a big-time mover today on that, and then you can get to hear Tennessee fans and Florida fans and Auburn fans talk about a Georgia bump, so y'all can have some fun with that. Stephen Wainwright says, any news on Kendall Milton? I know he gave like a Go Bucks thing on Twitter. That's about all I saw. I guess I probably should look a little bit more into that. Connor, did you see anything else from Milton in Columbus?
From what I have read, I believe he is planning his official visit to Georgia for June 14th.
Is that right?
Which is it's 2 weeks from now. It'll be a pretty big official visit weekend for Georgia that weekend. Joshua Braun, force off and tackle commit, will be here that weekend. There are a number of high priority targets who will be taking visits then. There's the hope that Darnell Washington could be amongst those, also visiting that weekend, though that'll likely be an unofficial for him. So I would keep that June 14th date in mind as a very big weekend for Georgia football.
So we'll need to pay attention to that for sure. Scott Harris says we need to have a DawgNation Daily Party July 26th. Gator Hater hits 1,000. So be careful on your numbers in this, Scott. And first of all, thank you so much for wanting to do this. I will tell you, we are going to be gone for a week for July 4th. So I'm going to take a family vacation that week, so that may affect these numbers a little bit. But yeah, when it hits 1,000, it's going to be good times. It's going to be good times for sure.
I hate to be the math guy here, but you taking a week off does not affect how many days it has been since. Now, to be fair, to be fair to BA, we've had a lot of discussions about what to do with BA's 1,000th show, which will be roughly around the same time as that. But yes, July 26th, it will have officially been 1,000 days since Georgia has beaten Florida. The math is correct on that.
So just because we don't have a show doesn't mean the Gator Hater update.
The Gator Hater does not stop.
Thank you very much for not making me feel like a total idiot for saying that. That's pretty funny. Brian Kephart says, just returned from vacation and enjoyed wearing my Gator Hater shirt around the University of Florida when I was passing through. Brian, that is a good man. You are a true patriot. Thank you so much. Cliff Payne says that Brinson has a whole year to get better. IMG still puts out a lot of elite players. Let's not be harsh with the guy who just trolled the Gators. And let's also be careful saying that IMG doesn't produce elite players when you got Nolan Smith lighting the world on fire apparently during Georgia spring practice. So let's be careful with that. Miller H says Keely Ringo just tweeted that he'll be releasing his top schools soon. So that's worth paying attention to.
He was at Texas this weekend.
Well, you can't keep them locked in their closet. Trust me, I got kids. As much as you want to just keep them locked in their room until they go off to college, you can't fully do that. Let me go over to Facebook here for a moment, get a few comments over there. John Anthony says, let me read this from John. He says, a Buckeye news guy predicted that Milton was a Buckeye and his dad set him straight. I don't know if that means set him straight about not going to Buckeye or whatever, not going to Ohio State or whatever. But, we talked about this a little bit on Friday, that we had to kind of brace for a little bit of, visit high stuff kind of coming off the thing with Kendall Milton there at Ohio State. And while I'm not privy to whatever facts led to this news report, it would certainly make sense. And this is one of the reasons why I've liked the Milton recruitment, because I like the recruitments where like the dads are kind of heavy involved in all this, because they are going to see through a lot of that, visit high stuff. I mean, as much as I don't like Ohio State, and I have no doubt they probably throw a pretty good party for an official visit. My guess is it's probably a pretty fun time. They've been doing this for a long time, so they probably do the official visits there pretty well. And gosh knows they know it's smart to get people up there in June as opposed to November or something like that. So they probably rolled out the red carpet in a big way. And you do need, a Chris Milton in this case to say, now, son, I know right now it seems like Ohio State's the only school in the world, but don't forget about LSU, and don't forget about Georgia, and don't forget about, I guess, Alabama. Don't forget about these other programs. And I'm guessing some of that probably did go on. I don't know that ends up benefiting Georgia, but that's one of the reasons why I like the deliberate recruitments, the ones that seem to have a lot of strategy behind them, because you don't run the risk of losing out on somebody just because of the kind of the wild momentum of a visit.
All indications with Milton are that the family is going to take all 4 official visits to. They just took their Ohio State one. They're going to LSU this weekend, and Georgia and Alabama as well. And then they will make a decision after they have sort of collected all the data from all 4 of those visits.
The other thing I will also say about all this too is that, and I don't know what's true and what's not with the Miltons, but a lot of times when you hear several fan bases or several media contingents around fan bases feeling confident about so-and-so player to so-and-so school, when that happens multiple times, there have been instances in the past where that was almost assuredly a deliberate strategy on the part of the player, making multiple schools feel like they're a part of it. And I don't know what's going on with the Miltons one way or another, but keep that in mind too, is that if LSU feels like they're getting Milton and Ohio State feels like it's getting Milton, and if Georgia feels like it's getting Milton, that could be by design. So just keep that in mind one way or another.
And so not to sort of, grease the wheels here and, if things go badly for Milton, we don't really know. I mean, as confident as we feel in Milton that ended up being a Bulldog, I think you would also admit there's a chance that he doesn't.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I paint you a picture regarding Zachary Evans?
Okay.
So Jeremy Birmingham came on our show last week and said that while Evans is while Ohio State is in his top 5, they haven't really recruited him that hard, and he has not visited Ohio State. So they seem like they're not really a part of his top 5. Oklahoma already has a commitment from a 5-star running back in Jace McClellan, and it sounds like they're pretty close with Seth McGowan, another highly rated 4-star running back out of Oklahoma.
There's a lot of message board chatter about that.
Georgia has been involved with, so that clearly shows that he's a talented player in the eyes of some of the best college football teams in the country. LSU signed multiple highly rated running backs last year, and Alabama signed a 5-star running back last year as well. I know Texas. I've held the belief that Texas is still going to make some noise in this, and A&M likely will as well. But of the 5 finalists, and based on some of the things that have been put out there by various recruiting sites, it would not be a surprise in the slightest to see Zachary Evans end up in Georgia. Now, that's not me saying that that's going to happen. I don't have any inside intel on this. It's reckless speculation. But if you sort of look at the way the rest of the Evans recruitment is going and is shaped up so far, of the 5 finalists he listed, Georgia should at least feel comfortable saying, hey, we can we can land the number 1 running back in the country.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, my level of optimism for Georgia and Evans is much higher than it was. Now, I've also said I'd like for Georgia to get 2 elite running backs, and maybe Evans and Milton's a needle too difficult to thread. That may end up being the case. But the one thing that's frustrating for me, and I essentially did a whole show about this, after everything that's been going on with Zachary Evans, if you listen to Jeremy Birmingham on our show last week, we're essentially right back where we started. Mm-hmm. Georgia has a good chance to get him, but it's going to be hard to pull him out of Texas. You know what I'm saying? It's like the top 5 for Evans didn't do enough for me to, I guess, feel like Georgia was moving the ball down the field with him. They may win the signature. They may get Zachary Evans, but it just seems like to me, the country song where it says, if the phone doesn't ring, you know it's me. This is one of those moments for Zachary Evans where Texas not being a part of his top 5 seems to be a pretty strong message to Florida from Zachary Evans.
To Texas.
Why do I keep saying Florida?
Got Florida on the mind.
I just do.
Florida's never going to land the number 1 running back. They can't even get the number 1 running back in their own state.
Right, exactly. It seems like a deliberate message to Texas from Evans, and that makes me just a little bit nervous there. It's almost like the thing of the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. By the way, that's a little philosophy for you. I would love for Zachary Evans to be indifferent to Texas, but he's clearly not indifferent to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there were comments made last week saying like he wants to see that Texas is on that Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma level of, hey, you can win. You can, it's not like you have to have one of those seasons where everything breaks right for you. It's like, yeah, you can have some things go wrong over the course of your season, and you're still going to be playing for a spot in a national championship game come December and early January.
Ro Hawkins says I like Evans better than Milton, and a lot of people probably do. And one thing that Connor kind of touched on there is that, and this is the one thing I think that got more message board chatter going within the last week than anything else, the fact that the Evans finalists and the Milton finalists look so similar, to the point even if Milton had a top 5, Oklahoma, based on some of the previous online chatter, almost certainly would have been his number 5 school. The fact that these are so similar, you start thinking about musical chairs with certain programs and certain elite running backs. Now, my crackpot theory on all this is that LSU is only a factor for one of these backs as long as Paris Johnson's a factor to, air quotes, flip from Ohio State to LSU. And ultimately, I don't think that's happening. So
no, he had some anti-Michigan comments this week that would lead you to believe that he is still a Buckeye.
Yeah, he did some of that about a week ago, too.
Yeah.
He's actually – it's one of those things where you can go back and see – I didn't see the stuff from this weekend, but the other day he was mocking Michigan for its revenge tour thing. This has been like a week or so ago. He's been doing enough of that leads you to believe this guy still has a little bit of that Ohio State thing going on there. So ultimately, his flirtation with LSU, he's probably not coming to Georgia because Georgia's seemingly involved in some of the other offensive linemen. But his flirtation with LSU, I think, is just kind of a fun. Recruits like having a good time. I think he stays at Ohio State, and I think that kind of changes things a little bit for LSU as far as being the place to be here. But that's also just a wild, wild speculation. Hugh Nash says, I love Milton, but then I saw Evans' tape. Wow, he is a rare talent. And the one thing about Evans is he plays in a very, very good league. That high classification Texas football is a really, really good league, and my understanding is he's just ripping folks out there. So there's no doubt he's a good player. There's no doubt he's a good player.
I think he ran like a 4.13 short shuttle, just, incredible athlete to go along with his natural abilities.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's no doubt about that. Jimmy Hoskins says, BA, give me Milton, Ringo, Birch, and Gilbert all day long. That would be a pretty good quartet right there.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a very, very good quartet. Philip Jordan Wells says that'd be the ultimate combo. Let me go back over to YouTube here for a moment. Stephen Wainwright says that was deep about my the opposite of love and hate stuff. Thanks. Every now and then I can throw in a little philosophy. What else we got going on? It's getting to the point now where I like half the time when y'all are arguing with people on YouTube, I'm not even sure who you're arguing with anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Tommy Boy 2236 mentioned Zeus. He had another one of those cool Instagram posts. Zamir White's actually, to be kind of a soft-spoken person in real life, he dominates social media. Zamir White dominates social media because every picture he takes, he looks like the most intense guy in the world. He just has an intense look on his face. He's in great shape. That's usually a pretty good combination for good photos. So every photo he takes is great, and he writes really good captions for his photos. He had an Instagram deal this weekend. I forget what it said, but it was something along the lines of, I don't know, just something really, really intense. Zamir White is really, really good at social media.
He's a guy who understands his brand and
Yeah.
knows that he doesn't have to put stuff out there
Yeah.
often and in a way that might sort of dilute when he does talk.
Yeah.
So when he does talk, we all sort of know to pay attention to this, or hey, don't forget about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. I saw Zamir White one time. Now, you gotta understand something. So when you're on campus, you just kind of sometimes you just pass the players, and my thing is I'm gonna give them total privacy. I'm not gonna speak to them or anything like that. That's their time to be free, time to be college students. I'm not gonna speak to them at all. But it's a natural. I'm a Southerner, so it's kind of a natural tendency to kind of do the hey, what's up thing when you walk by somebody. I would do that to you, not just because you're a Georgia football player. I do that to anybody. And most of the time you walk in campus, you kind of give the head nod, and they kind of give the head nod back. Well, it just so happened one day I turned the corner walking back to my car, and Zamir White comes walking right past me, and I give the head nod thing to him, and when I tell you I got nothing back, the same intense look that he gives on the football field, he also gave just kind of walking the sidewalk thing there. I wasn't looking for a conversation because I wouldn't have even tried to strike one up, but if you ever want to know what true intensity looks like, pass Zamir White on a sidewalk one day. That is true, full-on intensity. It was actually a pretty impressive thing to see. Crow King 123 says, over the spring training, I have been sold on how good Nakobe Dean is. Yeah, I mean, for all of you who kind of make fun of me for being, the engineer of the hype train, 9 times out of 10, this is actually one in which I've tried to pump the brakes and say, slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down. Don't expect too much from a freshman. Pay attention to some of these other linebackers. It certainly seems like that over the course of the last couple of months, I undersold Nakobe Dean's ability to make an impact. I don't think there's any doubt about that being true, that his potential impact this fall is probably bigger than what I started spring practice saying it was going to be, for sure.
I don't know about undersold. You certainly more than I did thought he was going to be a very good player, and said he is a must keep guy, and I didn't necessarily.
That's in comparison to other 2019 signings.
Yeah, just speaking in the 2019 class, and obviously I'm not saying you obviously should pass on 5-star talents. No, but I didn't think that if you didn't have him, Georgia would still be pretty good at linebacker this year. And coming in, I thought, there's, with given how Channing Tindall flashed a little bit last year, you bring back Monty Rice, you bring back Tay Crowder, you have Quay Walker, Ryan Davis and Tristan Marshall unhealthy, but you have good depth and you have good experience there. And he just said, to hell with that. I'm just going to come in and I'm just going to make plays right away and show that I'm good enough to probably play a contributing role in week 1 and eventually be a starter.
For sure. Miller H. says that Zamir's caption on Instagram was, this is actually a really cool line. Maybe this is a quote from some comic book or something, but he says, You can look into my eyes and see the demon in me. I mean, that's a pretty cool caption right there. Is that from something?
Where am I looking for this comment? Is it on YouTube?
Yeah. You can look into my eyes and see the demon in me. That's what he says. That's what Zamir said on Instagram. Somebody quoted. I said earlier that Zamir made a comment on Instagram, but I couldn't remember what the caption was. And somebody said that's what he said. You can look into my eyes and see the demon in me. And I said that's a pretty cool line. Is that from something? Is that quoting like some Jay-Z song, or is
Future?
Is that quoting Future?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. Nonetheless, I thought it was just like his own literary mind coming up with that. Jacob Thompson says, my wife says that quote all the time. It's a cool quote. Jacob McCannon says if what they say about Beck being a smart quarterback is true, then he could very well start after Fromm. Yeah, he's going to come in with a very good chance to do that. Very good chance to do that.
Brian Kephart asked a good question, and now that he is officially here on time, I feel like it's a good time to address it. Bigger impact this fall, George Pickens or Nakobe Dean?
Dean. I wouldn't have said that earlier, but I believe I'll go Dean. Putting Dean out there with the so-called starters for G-Day, I thought was a pretty significant statement, and for Nolan and Jermaine Johnson too, because Kirby Smart had every opportunity not to do that. I mean, certainly you don't necessarily gain anything by doing it. If anything, you could have held that back from them as a carrot going into the summer practices. I took that to kind of mean something. I do. James Bryant says Dean because Pickens going to have a lot to learn. In this case, I think I agree with what James is saying, that spring practice kind of matters here. Look at Monty Rice in 2017. He used that spring practice to get himself on the field. And so I think that's another kind of argument for Nakobe Dean's, the fact that he has that spring practice under his belt. And Eric Patton's kind of saying the same thing there on that.
I have to say Dean, but that's only because I've put a heavy investment in Dominic Blaylock's stock, and I need that to turn out well. And part of that was, with this idea that Pickens may come in a little bit later, a little delayed because of what his grade situation were. And credit to Pickens, just going in and alleviating any and all of those concerns.
Yeah.
Coming in, getting ready to play right away. And, this summer it's going to be interesting with him because, as you pointed out on your show today, Kirby wants to see these guys come in and sort of make an impact right away.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's very true and very well said. And while I am guilty a lot of times of saying it's either Blaylock or Pickens, the truth is Blaylock's probably an interior receiver, and Pickens is almost certainly probably not going to be an interior receiver. There is a chance that Georgia has two freshmen in significant roles.
Yeah.
While mathematically that doesn't probably happen a ton, the presence of Pickens or the presence of Blaylock does not disqualify the other. Now, it probably does for, as we said before, between the four somewhat newcomers, Robertson in an expanded role, Cager graduate transfer, the two freshmen, you can't have all four of those guys just explode on the scene. Cager's probably an outside guy, so it's probably either Cager or Pickens. Robertson, to my surprise, is probably an inside guy now, so it's probably Blaylock or Robertson. And then you'll figure out how Kyrus Jackson fits into that mix. But the two freshmen don't necessarily cancel each other out. Zach Smith says, props to Pickens for getting everything in order to qualify. And it's also important to point out here, maybe Connor does, but I don't. I don't think any of us knows how true any of this ever really was.
Yeah.
The one thing you got to be really careful with, and on this show we try to strike a fine line because I'm a fan. I live in the world of fan conversation. If there's a predominant fan conversation, it would be foolish for me to pretend that it doesn't exist, and the Pickens grade thing's an example of that. However, there are a lot of things that people assume they know that they don't always know. Occasionally, there are some subjects that pop up where I have a little more knowledge on them, and sometimes I'm amazed at how the predominant fan conversation, it does not reflect the facts as I believe I understand them from trusted sources. So while anybody who gets their grades together and gets in school deserves to be commended for that, because that's a pretty significant accomplishment. Graduating high school, getting to college, that's something we all hopefully strive to do. When it comes to this situation in particular, we may never know what the real story was, and I wouldn't be surprised if the real story is not slightly different than what every fan on every corner of every message board assumed it was. Jennifer Caldwell Sperlin asked about the transfer portal. So Jaden Hunter announced his new destination. He had been in the transfer portal. He's going to Western Kentucky. So that was the transfer portal news, at least that I know from this weekend. Nick Lurch says a few years ago we were nowhere near where we are now in terms of the riches of players, and that's very true. It's a very deep Georgia roster right now, a very deep Georgia roster. James Bryant says, my SAT score back in the day about matched my IQ. That's how well I did. To me, Pickens is an Einstein. Listen, all these guys, I mean, I've told y'all before, I was not a great student in high school. I was a little bit better student in college, but I was not a good student in high school. So these guys who managed to succeed in the athletic endeavor on the football field and then go out and do it in the classroom as well, I give them a lot of credit for that because I'm not quite so sure I was mature enough to do all that back when I was their age. Robert Maloney says, do you think we see Reese push LeCount? We very well could. I think Otis Reese is a good player, but one of my hot buttons this summer is I'm a little higher on LeCount than some of y'all are. And I think that Richard's still going to be heard from. And listen, Otis Reese is good enough to push anybody. But I sort of get a feeling that maybe we've kind of gone the other way with LeCount. You know, when you're a former 5-star and you're on the field, at the beginning of the year, maybe he was slightly overrated. But then when people see some of the things that go on and he gets criticism, it gets to the point now where it may have gone too far the other direction. I think that LeCount's actually probably an underrated player now. Now, to hear Richie talk, and we heard him during the spring, I mean, he steps up and owns everything that y'all have said about him. Not making enough tackles, need to be a little more physical. He just owns it. Just came out and said it. Just started telling tales about himself and really open and honest about his desire to be a better tackler, more technique and more stout physicality to be able to do that. So he's on it when it comes to the thing that y'all want to see more from him on. But at this point in time, I think maybe a little bit better than some of y'all think.
Yeah, two things on that. One, Reese has already pushed LeCount for his starting job. Reese started the Auburn game last year over LeCount. Now, LeCount ultimately did get in there and took a majority of the reps. But, I think the coaching staff was sending messages as far back as, last November. But to your point, and, Kirby would not make the comments he makes about Richard LeCount if he did not think that he could handle them and, sort of grow and embrace them. And I think, I think he has, and my expectation is, unless Reese just has a phenomenal summer and it's kind of been glossed over, but Reese was not healthy for G-Day. He had an illness, missed a couple of spring practices. So, come August 31st when Georgia's lining up against Vanderbilt, I still sort of expect Richard LeCount to be out there with the first-team defense.
Well, we have a lot of really good comments in the comment section today. To change the subject here for a moment, Jarvis Hanna says, do you think, B.A., that Nolan Smith could make a Zion Williamson-like impact for Georgia? Now, I'm going to change this just slightly. Could Nolan Smith, by the end of this year, be a household name within college football circles? There's at least some chance that could happen. Because the thing that Nolan is good at does make you famous. And I'm going to compare him again for a moment to a Nakobe Dean. Let's say that Nakobe Dean, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say his level of performance is like an 8.5, which for a freshman would be really, really good.
Yep.
Let's say that on a scale of 1 to 10, Nolan Smith's level of performance is like a 7.5, which for a freshman would still be pretty good. But because of what Nolan does, he'll get more attention than what Nakobe Dean does. Like Pro Football Focus and all these, more analytically minded sites, they may be telling us that Nakobe's the better player, but if Nolan's getting sacks, he's going to be very, very well known. And if you said right now, I know Connor's done his rankings of like the best Georgia players and things like that, but let's say we rank the most famous Georgia players. Obviously, Fromm, I believe, is the most famous at all. I'm guessing Swift's probably number 2 on that. Mm-hmm. But on the list of most famous Georgia players, you got some open spots there beyond that. Could Nolan Smith be like kids put poster on their wall famous by the end of the season, kind of like Zion would be for Duke? Yes. Now Zion Williams also became a phenomenon where,
he was a phenomenon coming into college.
Yeah,
I don't think Nolan is that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching a Zion Williamson game on Facebook Live like 2 years ago. So he's been famous for a long time. So the kind of cultural phenomenon that Barack Obama came to watch one of his games play. I mean, the kind of cultural phenomenon type stuff. I don't think that is available to Nolan Smith. But let's keep it just to the world of college football for a moment. Big time fans, not just Georgia fans. Could Nolan Smith be the kind of guy that kids are putting posters on their wall, and could he be like that sort of – could he be Jake Fromm famous by the end of the year? It's at least a possibility. I think that Nolan Smith could be Jake Fromm famous by the end of the year.
Yeah, do you think kids still put posters on their wall?
But you understand what I'm saying when I say that.
I think he's got to have a great nickname to have a poster on the wall.
That's probably true. I do – for those of you who are not as old as me and you missed the poster era, because I feel like the 80s were the best poster era. I know that there's, a lot of folks are partial to some of the stuff in the 70s. The 70s didn't really have the posters. 80s had some great, great posters. So for those of you who didn't grow up in the poster era, I feel sorry for you. But to the extent that, whatever that still is now, Nolan Smith being a poster player, Jake Fromm famous, I think there's a chance that could happen. By the way, Easy Brown brings up a good name. On the list of most famous Georgia players, Hot Rod belongs in that with
Hot Rod's probably number 2.
He may be more famous than DeAndre Swift.
Yeah.
Could very well be. Matt Rugavina says you can't have posterizing without posters, and that's certainly true. Curtis Reese says kids still put posters up. Curtis, that means that you're just a good parent then, because that's really good stuff.
Does Charlie have any posters in his room?
No, not yet. I got to get him some posters. What if so obviously you should probably have a say in what your own room is. But what if I did his whole room kind of in like 80s style with I had the Dale Murphy, Dwight Gooden stickball poster. Now, Murphy had a couple really good posters, but there was one, it was called Stickball, where it was in a back alley in New York with Murphy holding basically a broom handle and Dwight Gooden throwing some sort of ball. That was a cool one. There was also a couple Chicago ones that had Walter Payton and Michael Jordan and Andre Dawson, same poster. What if I did Charlie's room in just all 80s posters? Dominique Wilkins dunking on people. That would be fantastic. Matt, now I get this reference. I'm wondering how much of our audience does. Matt Talley says that he's got Nolan Smith on the front of his Trapper Keeper right now. You have any idea what a Trapper Keeper is?
Isn't it like a hunting thing or something like that?
No. A Trapper Keeper was. Do you know what the folders are that have they have basically the binders, the rings. You put the rings in there.
Yep.
So Trapper Keeper was the thing back in the 80s. It was like a little wraparound thing for that kind of folded over. But the Trapper Keeper, the point of the Trapper Keeper was just the Trapper Keeper. The stuff inside of it wasn't that big of a deal. But that was the most significant status symbol whatsoever back when I was in the 3rd grade. So I really, really appreciate the Trapper Keeper reference. That's fantastic. Gerald Harmon says, I had Bo Jackson, Jordan, Barkley, David Justice, and NWA posters in my room. I'm assuming he means the hip-hop group and not the Southern professional wrestling outfit. Either way, I will accept either answer. I'll accept either answer. I'll accept Ice Cube and the rest of that gang. I'll also accept Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, and the Rock and Roll Express, too. Jimmy Durham also said he had a Heather Locklear poster. Now we're getting into a very different conversation. Before we go off the air, let me do something real quick. And I know that this is not for everybody, so I'll try to make it very, very quick, and we'll do some football before we're done. Chip Tower said a moment ago that baseball's a weird sport and weird things happen in the postseason. And certainly I've watched enough baseball to know how weird it can be, especially at the major league level where the postseason does not reflect the 162-game season, frankly, very often at all. In college baseball, it's a little bit different kind of thing because they don't play nearly as long a regular season, and the good team does win, certainly the overwhelming majority of regular season games. I'm not going to be as mad about what happened as some Georgia baseball fans are going to be because obviously emotions can be high after a weekend like this. I'm not going to be as mad as some Georgia baseball fans are, but I can't completely just disregard this and say, this is just, weird stuff happens in baseball either. I can't completely sweep it under the rug either. Georgia played bad defense. It didn't throw strikes. And frankly, the most telling thing to me of all was Saturday night was a very emotional game. There was a lot of chirping back and forth, a lot of staring into dugouts, a lot of a lot of just intensity that you expect from a really good college baseball game. It's one of the things that makes college baseball fun. I thought that Florida State thrived on that. I thought that Georgia wilted within that context. And that was one of those things that for me kind of left me saying, ooh, it's too much of a cliche to say, couldn't handle the pressure of the moment. But there's no doubt that Georgia seemingly played different this weekend than it has played at any point in time this season. I'm not beside myself in anger about it. I think this program's still got a bright future. But it definitely caused me to consider how much did the stage impact what you saw from Georgia over the weekend?
Not a lot. I do think the stage got to Wilcox a little bit last night. And even with Wilcox, I mean, Strickland has said, post-game that, he just struggled locating his fastball, and that's happened a couple times. It happened in the SEC tournament when he had a couple of wild pitches. And with Hancock, it's his first time. It was his first time sort of being in that situation where, all right, you have to be the guy. Lights are on, and I understand he was a Friday starter, but that's a true pressure situation, and maybe it did get to him a little bit. But to be quote unquote mad about that, I don't know. Georgia, Hancock's going to be back next year. Wilcox is going to be back next year. Yeah, you might lose Tony Losi, and you're probably going to lose Aaron Schunk to the draft. But, the pitching staff is, once again, going to be the best in the SEC. And, the offense, it's hard to imagine it being any worse. So, I still think the future is very bright for Georgia. It's clear that, it sort of has a hump to get over.
It's funny you say about Wilcox being affected by the moment yesterday. I thought Hancock looked really affected by the moment.
And I didn't get a chance to watch the Saturday game.
Yeah, you're busy doing other things. But I thought Hancock kind of looked – I'm not saying that's the reason Georgia lost the game, but there was a lot of just – it was a fun baseball game in the early going because there was a lot of energy on both sides. And I didn't love the way Georgia responded to that. But
now, and I will say, as much as, all year, and you said this, Strickland said this, just anybody who's watched this team has said it. It's been a pitching and defense team. The pitching wasn't great in the 2 losses to Florida State, and the defense wasn't much better either. I went through and looked up some numbers. In games this year where Georgia had given up 6 or more runs, if you count the 2 Florida State games, 7 and 9.
Yeah, it's tough.
And especially when you fall behind early like Georgia did, it was always going to be hard to sort of make up those runs as got to the 4th, 5th inning and they're already down 5-0.
So Marcinio Askew cuts right to the chase. He says, so basically we choked again. If you're the number 4 national seed and you get blitzed twice by a team that there are plenty of people in that stadium this weekend who before the start of the regional would have even questioned Florida State's deservingness to even be in the tournament. Is that a choke job by Georgia?
No, not a choke job. Choking is when you have a big lead and blow it over the course of a game. Sometimes you just get beat and you get upset. I think maybe Georgia's losses to Alabama, those would qualify better as chokes than what happened to Georgia. I don't consider Virginia losing to UMBC a year ago. I don't consider that a choke job. Sometimes you just get beat.
Yeah, I mean,
do you consider it a choke? It sounds like you do.
I don't know that I know enough about college baseball to say whether it is or it isn't.
I mean, the number 3 seed also lost this weekend. They're Georgia Tech.
Yeah,
they're out. UCLA lost. They're having to play again today to stave off elimination. So in college baseball, sometimes this does happen. Now, I will say, 5 of the 6 teams from the SEC West did advance to Super Regionals this weekend, but whereas all the SEC East teams are out.
Yeah.
But sometimes this stuff happens in college baseball. Oregon State won it all last year, and they lost their first 2 games, and they're done. And they were a regional host.
Now, Arkansas, what they did last year was a choke.
Yeah.
They can't field that final out in that game. I guess here's my final thought on this. I think it's going to be a tough 12 months for Georgia baseball because now that this has happened 2 years in a row, fair or unfair, this will be the dominant narrative of can you get out of a regional. And so the work is really going to be cut out for this team for the next year because they were hearing a bunch of this stuff going into this year's regional because of what happened a year ago. The fact that it's happened now 2 years in a row is a storyline they need to very quickly change.
I think everyone who sort of followed Georgia baseball this year would say it was a fun season up until this past weekend. This coming season will not be just because of how the season ended. This season will not be as fun as this past season was.
And I said this briefly during the regular show. the real loss for George is not the advancing to the Super Regional as much as it is the fans you would have gained along the way.
Yep.
Because sometimes you can just kind of feel things, and there's a chance it's not even true, but it felt true, that there were so many people kind of leaning in to say, okay, this thing's going to go on a run. Georgia versus LSU in Athens this upcoming weekend would have been a blast. It would have been so much fun, so much intensity. And there were people just kind of ready to jump on the bandwagon. And now that never materialized, it's no guarantee you ever get those people back. I mean, listen,
Right.
As a content creator, I'm going to tell you, baseball as content is a tough sell. And I love it. I loved being at Foley Field. I enjoy watching those games. But baseball as content is a very tough sell. When you have a chance to win fans over, you got to do it. And same thing is true for the basketball team as well. When you have a chance to win over fans, you have got to do it, and they missed a real chance to do that.
I will. So, there probably may not be the same attention that was paid last year, March through early May. But if Georgia's in the regional next year and they're pushing through again and they're a top 8 seed, I think there is still going to be plenty of interest and plenty of healthy interest in how this team does.
But then you've also got Danny Blackman on YouTube saying, we got to start the football season because they're talking about baseball. So, how about a final football thought from somebody before we get out of here today? Kenneth Wiggins says the Diamond Dogs weren't built for Omaha. I mean, certainly there's some argument being made for that, although the sport's not quite as offensive dominant as it used to be. Anybody got?
I got one.
Football thought to close this out. Okay, go ahead.
So Crystal Chrissy mentioned this on YouTube, and we sort of referenced this on the show. So there was the Cortez Hankton sort of got the ball rolling with the posting a picture of his position group. You see what Del McGee and Sam Pittman did as well? They sort of followed the lead.
I did. I saw McGee had his spread. He took a picture of all the food they had. And at first, this shows you what an idiot I am, because the first picture I saw from McGee's house, there was no meat on the table. It was just like all sides and cupcakes. I was panicked. I was like, these running backs need some protein. And then you finally see what looked to be not
ribs, brisket.
Some good looking stuff there. There were some hot dogs, which I don't love, but I guess you gotta let the kids eat what they want to eat. The cupcakes look fantastic. Couldn't tell if that was a cream cheese base in the icing or not, but look, a really nice spread from Del McGee's house. And then I saw the Sam Pittman picture on the pool. And here's my theory on this, Crystal, that if you printed that picture out and you showed it to someone, let's say it wasn't a Georgia fan, and you said, look at this picture, and then you took it away, and you said, how many guys were in that picture? I think the average person, upon seeing that picture and then having it taken from them, would say there were 50 people in that picture. That picture looks like there are 50 guys. It's like 10 dudes. Those offensive linemen around that pool block out the sun. It is amazing how big Georgia's offensive linemen are. It's amazing. I mean, they fill that photo screen. Unbelievable.
So I have to ask, of the 3 coaches, if you got the chance to attend one of those,
not even close.
You going offensive line?
Not even close. Not even close. I just feel like we didn't see the Sam Pittman spread, but it's a much better spread. I mean, listen, Del McGee, he may be too no-nonsense for me. Mm-hmm. And, I want him coaching the running backs that way because they need that.
He's not going to have, to your point, he's going to have hot dogs. He's going to have hamburgers. He's going to go your mac and cheese, your strict by the book, traditional spread, which I enjoy as much as anyone.
Yeah, I'm a comfort food eater, but here's the problem. And I know this is true. Del McGee is one of those guys that gives you a little side eye as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine
if you put too much on your plate, he's like.
It's the second trip, though. It's like when you go back that second time, he gives you that look of how much food you're going to eat here. Whereas Sam Pittman is not giving you any kind of looks for going back for that second plate. Now, he knows you're going to be, getting.
He'll hand you 2 plates.
Yeah, you're going to get conditioning. You're going to lose a lot of that weight anyway. You saw the picture the other day with Ben Cleveland without his shirt on. These guys are getting physical condition, but they deserve to eat. They deserve a good plate of food and a second plate if they want to. So I feel like that Sam Pittman knows how to throw a party, and that's the guy whose house I want to be at. And I don't really think it's going to be all that close. I don't even think it'd be close.
Well, Jarvis Jones was at the Del McGee party.
Yeah, but isn't he from Columbus though?
I believe, yeah.
Yeah, I think they both have that Carver connection down there.
So to sort of tie, the food, the coaches, the baseball we have dominated this week. I know you probably didn't get a chance to watch because you were actually at the game, but In the early game yesterday against FAU, they kept cutting to Kirby. And every time they cut to him, he was funneling a different type of food in his mouth.
I
like
never
he was
could
Brad
figure out.
Pitt in Ocean's 11.
I never could figure out where he was sitting. Where was he sitting?
I want to say he was sitting directly behind home plate,
Like in those like dugout club area.
Yeah.
Okay, I never could figure out where he was sitting because everybody kept saying they were seeing him. And I was kind of looking around the stadium. I wanted to see him too, just kind of see what he was doing. I did hear that he was eating a lot of concession stand food. Good for him. I guess I think the problem is that the Kirby popcorn gift, because it was in reference to Justin Fields, maybe some Georgia fans think it has to be retired now. So maybe he's trying to create a new popcorn gift.
It did look like he was shoveling maybe some barbecue into his mouth. So I can live with that.
There's a lot of food in that dugout club. They take really good care of those people.
And I wouldn't have a problem if Kirby was like stress eating on the sideline during games. Just eating a hot dog in the middle of calling a defense. I'd have no issue with that. These guys got to eat. It's a long day. It's hot outside. You gotta keep yourself fueled and hydrated.
Hugh Nash says, I think our offensive line needs to do a video shoot where they are rocking the pool while Pit Boss looks on proudly. I can only imagine what a pool party with all those guys must be like. I mean, you're talking about, I bet that pool needs almost like a half a load's worth of new water put in after all those guys splash all that water out. Can you imagine how much water displacement there is in the swimming pool after they've all been in there? Good for them, man. Living the life, enjoying it. Although I'd be so nervous about what kind of summer conditioning stuff Scott Sinclair was going to put me through. I might be afraid to eat too much. Richard Pollard says he does think the Kirby popcorn gift needs to be retired. Wouldn't mind seeing a new popcorn gift.
He has to go recreate that with Carson Beck.
That's a pretty good idea. I actually kind of like that. Steve Shaffini says, meanwhile, Jim Chaney's pool party in Knoxville. Yeah, something tells me that Jim Chaney, probably not quite the same party host. Pittman, and he puts this on Twitter every year. He throws a
Kentucky Derby
party.
I have had friends who have been lucky enough to attend that. They say it is an incredible party to attend.
If you gave me the choice of going to the Kentucky Derby with Tom Brady, who goes every year, or going to Sam Pittman's house at the Kentucky Derby, I'd take Pittman in any second. Second.
Well, because I worry that I might drink too much and die of alcohol poisoning if I go with Tom Brady.
Pittman's Kentucky Derby party on Twitter always looks like the party of the year. That looks like a really, really fun time. All right, we got to go. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate that. A lot of stuff coming up on the site the next couple of days. As some of you also mentioned, we got one more week to go without Jeff Sintel, and I enjoyed following along the Facebook comments. Some of y'all talking about Jeff being in Italy right now. There's only no telling what he's doing across the pond as he enjoys his vacation, but he's earned some time off. So we'll get you covered here, including back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live. Have a great day. We'll look forward to seeing you then.